IVM.
Paying your credit card bills on time is a great policy. This IPL, pay your credit card bills on Cred and stand a chance to win the Cred Daily Jackpot, a daily mystery reward on the app unveiled every 13th over of the first innings of the match. Prizes include a 10,000 rupee Puma shopping spree or a 3-year supply of Old Spice deodorants, which I love, or even a Samsung frame TV. All this and tons more in the Cred Daily Jackpot. So just download Cred. Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host, Shambhavi Naik. Today we are going to be discussing about the two words that have probably become the most common words on WhatsApp, Twitter groups, and in the news, Remdesivir and plasma. Over the past few days, we have seen a huge increase in demand for these as India has been gripped by a second wave of COVID-19. We are seeing a lot more demand than we did in the first wave. And to discuss this demand with me is this demand real? Is a shortage that we are seeing real? I have Ruturaj Gowaikar, who has very recently joined Takshashila and is a student of Takshashila's DFA program as well as the Health and Life Sciences program. Welcome, Ruturaj.
Thanks, Shambhavi. Good morning.
Good morning. So, Ruturaj, first of all, what are these drugs and therapies that people are saying will definitely save lives of their loved ones?
Right. So currently, three things are in talk, especially on social media. One is plasma therapy. The other two are a drug called Remdesivir and another drug called Tocilizumab. Now, the third one, Tocilizumab, as the name suggests, is actually an antibody. And we will talk about all these three things separately. Now, plasma therapy that is being talked in reference to COVID-19 is actually one form of plasma therapy. The formal name of it is convalescent plasma therapy. So what happens in this is a particular patient who has successfully fought an infection, in this case, the coronavirus, would have certain antibodies against this virus circulating in his blood. Now, these antibodies are harvested and then given to a patient who is struggling to fight the disease on his own or even with certain diseases in his system. So this is plasma therapy. The name plasma because these antibodies are part of the plasma, a part of the blood, and hence the plasma therapy. Now, coming to the second drug in question, Remdesivir, it's actually a pretty old antiviral compound. As we all know, the COVID-19 is caused by a virus, the coronavirus, and it makes sense that an antiviral compound, which is known to act against certain virulent viruses like hepatitis C, Ebola, Marburg, would be thought of as one of the therapeutic agents against corona. And the other one is Tocilizumab, which is an antibody. It's not actually a chemical compound. Now, this was thought of initially to treat inflammation-related diseases. And we all know that in COVID-19, in certain severely affected individuals, there is inflammation of the lung, and that can have severe complications in the later half, even after a person has successfully fought off the virus. So this Tocilizumab is being given to people not to cure the infection as per se, but to treat and reduce the inflammation of the lungs. Yeah.
Right. So what are the actual guidelines that surround the use of these therapies, both internationally as well as in India?
Yes. So as we all know that the disease was relatively new to the scientific world as well as to the lay people. So the guidelines have been changing as the scientific community, the medical fraternity has been gathering new data and analyzing this data based on individual hospital anecdotal evidences or larger multi-hospital studies, or even in certain cases, the classic randomized controlled studies. So initially, these drugs were used by over 50 countries. In fact, WHO also not exactly promoted, but was okay with the use of this because the disease was new and people were trying everything in the kitty to treat such a deadly virus. But but as I said, as new data is gathered and analyzed, guidelines need to change, and this is actually happening in in countries. Let's say the data we have is for US and UK as well as certain WHO guidelines. So they have been constantly updating their guidelines, but somehow in India, our guidelines are stuck and they are not reflecting the current status of the new data.
Right. It has been quite interesting, right? Because I remember back in November, I think 2020, that the ICMR actually put out a guideline for an advisory for the use of plasma. And they actually said that they had conducted a open label phase 2 trial across 39 public and private hospitals. And based on that study, for the management of moderate COVID-19, in India, it was concluded that convalescent plasma therapy did not lead to reduction in progression to severe COVID 19 or an all cause mortality in the group that received CPT as compared to the group that did not receive CPT. So clearly, there was some evidence already that plasma does not seem to actually affect the severity of disease or the progression of disease. And it's strange that this data has been around for a few months, and yet we continue to see this existing dependence on getting plasma. We get these frantic messages on Twitter and on WhatsApp asking people for plasma donations. It's a little strange, right? Because I think there is also internationally a lot of evidence that shows that particularly plasma does not seem to help with COVID.
That's true. So, in fact, on a press conference that happened on April 19th, the Chief Dr. Randeep Guleria of the AIMS, that is All India Institute of Medical Sciences, talked about remdesivir and plasma therapy to a certain extent. He said that we don't have evidence as such. He said this in a presser. Yet somehow it has not translated to the front lines. Those are the COVID hospitals. So I think so. There is a problem in communication from the doctor, the scientific and the medical fraternity, and the governing bodies which actually dictate these standardized protocols.
Right, because in remdesivir as well, there seems to be a specific subgroup of people that seem to benefit from getting remdesivir. Not everybody, and yet we see this really panic buying. We see like black markets emerging, cost going skyrocketing for these drugs, and a clear shortage that has been caused just by unregulated demand, which is not adhering to standardized protocols. And this could be because we might not have those standardized protocols communicated properly, or we might just not be very good at creating standardized protocols.
Yes, about the cost angle, I would like to highlight that remdesivir that is being that has generated this notion in India that it's like the main workhorse to fight against COVID-19 is actually a very costly drug. One vial costs around 5,000 to 5,500 rupees, and in India, one vial is given to one patient for nearly 10 to 14 days. So that's actually a very costly drug, and it's very puzzling that why is such a costly drug being given as the only apparently the only form of therapeutic. If we see one of the most recent guidelines that are available to us from NIH, that is National Institute of Health of USA, they have clearly stated that remdesivir shouldn't be used liberally. It has to be used with patients who don't seem to have recovered after 10 days and have severe dependency for oxygen. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it goes beyond just these drugs, right? Because we see these prescriptions again on social media where people are like really recommending like a menu of drugs from ivermectin. We our old favorite hydroxychloroquine, which doesn't seem to have gone away despite multiple studies showing that it is probably not of much use. And there's also this panic buying. There's also fear that, hey, what happens if I get the disease? There seems to be some confusion, particularly over ivermectin, I think, on whether it is prophylactic or whether it is going to be used as a treatment. And people are just, I think, popping pills. I think it's a clear failure, like you said, of communication, right?
Yes. So if we again resort to NIH guidelines, the drugs they have mentioned are quite a few. I won't list all of them, but if we see most of the therapeutics, I shouldn't use the word drugs, that the US has sort of put in their guidelines seem to be antibodies against the spike protein of coronavirus and certain corticosteroids to reduce the lung related injuries due to prolonged infection. So antiviral drugs like remdesivir are not the mainstay of WHO or NIH guidelines. So I think so. We that it's fine to piggyback on certain policies or certain guidelines present in other countries, which seem to reflect the latest data. That's what I think. What do you think, Shambhavi?
Yeah, I think we have to be smart about this, right? I mean, part of the problem is that I think the second wave seems to have caught a lot of agencies unawares. And I don't think that by itself makes sense because from the experience globally, we know that the second wave was going to come. From historical evidence, we know that the second wave was likely to be more severe than the first. So, why we weren't prepared for that, I think, is a question for an entirely different podcast. But now that we are in this situation, we really need to be able to look at the data that we have on the use of these medications, both within India and outside, and be able to prescribe them in a manner that the trade offs are the best met. So, for example, with remdesivir, there's a clear advantage of giving them to a certain subset of people, and they should be reserved only for that group instead of this indiscriminate use that we are now seeing across the country, and that has caused this kind of shortage which was unnecessary, and it is probably depriving those people who would actually benefited from getting the therapeutic from getting it, and it's also, I think, causing unnecessary guilt on behalf of a lot of families who feel that this one drug might have been the savior, but they are not able to get it right. And like it is, I can understand the frustration. You can see the heartfelt messages that people are putting out asking for this drug, and it is heartbreaking, right? Because I think a lot of doctors have been proactively writing about this, saying that, hey, look, this does not help in all of the conditions. We don't know whether it would have saved your loved one, etc. But still, I think that guilt will bear down for a long time to come.
Yes, talking of guilt, the guilt is also is felt by certain doctors. So there have been certain pieces on social media where doctors have written where the family of the patient actually demands these drugs, especially remdesivir. And though the doctors know that this patient is not the right candidate for such a drug, they are forced to give because the doctors don't want to appear as if they are not doing anything. So, though there are studies, one of the largest studies that was sponsored by WHO called the Solidarity Study, which shows that remdesivir doesn't actually save lives in most people. It only probably reduces the time of infection by 2 days. Is still being administered by doctors in spite of them having access to this data only because of public pressure.
Yeah, I think this is where we really need more step in by our health agencies, right? In creating that awareness that, hey, look, this might not work for everybody. Let's just focus on what works for your loved one, and let the doctor decide that, because he or she is the best judge depending on the context and the condition. We know, for example, that again, as with the first wave, a majority of patients will get through this without actual need for hospitalization. We know that hospitalization rates by themselves have gone up, but still a majority of people will get through this without hospitalizations. But we also seeing these reports that, hey, people who are at home are also being prescribed remdesivir. Again, I think it is down to that pressure that what if things go bad? What if I need it? Putting pressure on the doctor and just creating this unnecessary situation where you're taking a drug which probably does not help you at all, and you're depriving someone who might actually would have benefited from it. I think it is, yeah, I think we just need a better coordinated health communication response on what is working and what is not.
So this ends up becoming a public policy problem in a way. Can I say that?
It is, I mean, obviously better guidelines on conditions under which certain drugs could be prescribed is would be useful. I mean, again, I remember some of the ICMR advisories have been very vague, right? We have data which shows that this therapy doesn't work, but then there's anecdotal data from doctors where it might work under certain situations, and that doesn't help. Because if I have a patient who's reading this, and I am thinking, hey, maybe it will help me, right? And therefore, I will buy this drug because I don't know who's going to take the chance.
Yes.
And that kind of suspicion in is going on in everybody's head. So you can see why people might be like rushing to this drug because of fear that, hey, look, it might there might be a shortage, I might not be able to get it when I need it, so let me just buy and keep it if I can have access now. And then those vague guidelines really kind of worsen the situation, because instead of saying that, okay, only if you're in this subgroup do you need the vaccine, do you need the drug, you've basically left it open and said that, hey, we don't know. In certain situations, doctors have seen it to be of benefit.
Right.
Anecdotally.
Yeah. So this is clearly a communication problem, but it also is a reflection of a very unique framework that India possesses about selling such drugs across the counter. If you see, let's say UK and US again, to take as an example, you don't have pharmacies like India. You need prescriptions. Even to refill your prescriptions, you need a prescription. While in India, even drugs scheduled H, though supposed to be only sold with a prescription, are routinely sold across the counter. And Remdesivir is actually a drug which should not be sold across the counter over without a prescription. So I think so. There are other policy issues that probably we need to address in the long term as well, apart from the communication bit.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is based on my anecdotal evidence. So I'm just going to put that disclaimer in. We tend to pop pills, right? We tend to pop antibiotics, for example, every time someone gets a little fever, which is in the long term going to come back and bite us eventually as we develop, as we see antimicrobial resistance being developed. And I think this has been there around for a while. So that really needs to change. You are correct about these chemists and pharmacists, where you can, I think the good ones are the ones who demand the prescription, but obviously not all of them do. I think there are certain restrictions that have now been put on some of the COVID-19 related drugs, where wholesalers have to, I think every day, go back and report on how many drugs were sold to whom, etc. So they have to keep that kind of evidence on hand. But I think we can do much better than what we currently are in the long term. And again, I mean, we saw with Remdesivir in Maharashtra, there was this huge chaos going on over who can buy, who can sell, whether a political party can buy it, whether you need licenses and all of that. I mean, it just adds to the chaos, right? And we could have done without any of that chaos. So yeah, it is. I think there's a lessons to be learned from this entire incident on clear communication. I mean, from the entire COVID-19 response itself, but even from this small example of plasma and remdesivir. And I think people are now becoming more aware. I see at least a few people standing up and saying that we won't help with requests for plasma or for remdesivir unless it is specified and the conditions for the request are known. So it is slowly creeping back in. And again, I think a lot of what we are seeing is from cities, right? We don't even know what and how much of these things are available in rural parts of the country, and what conditions they have to cope with. So there's clearly a lot we can do to learn from this entire incident, and hopefully take away the lessons for improving future health responses. Clearly, we have not learned everything that we could have from the first wave. See, we are again scrambling to put up our a cogent health response in the second wave. But hopefully, at least this time, we'll learn and be better prepared for a potential third wave. What do you think, Ruturaj?
Yeah, I mean, a part of scientific temper is that you always take new data and reform your strategies. We seem to have failed, at least on the Indian national scale. We have not learned a lesson from the first wave. I hope there is not a third wave, but if there's a third wave, I hope we do inculcate the experience from first and second wave and help our fellow citizens.
Yeah, I guess we have to be prepared for a third wave, whether it comes or not. If it doesn't, it will be best. But if we are not prepared, then it's going to be like this all over again. Okay, thanks, Ruturaj, for talking us through the various trials and evidences for these therapies. I think we'll end here with the message of staying safe. I think the one thing that we have known again and again to work is masking up. So please double mask or wear an N95 mask and
Wash your hands and avoid people if possible.
avoid people. Yes, social distance as much as you can. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Ruturaj.
Thank you for inviting me, Shambhavi.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe and do continue listening to All Things Policy.
The Takshashila Institution is an independent, non-partisan think tank and a school of public policy. We have education programs lasting 1 semester and 1 year that are tailored specifically for people like you. They are all online and you can take them from anywhere. Admissions are now open for our 12-week graduate certificate program in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, technology policy, and health and life sciences. Visit takshashila.org.in/courses to find out more. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, thewholetruthfoods.com, PayPal, Cred, and SIAT. Thank you so much for working with us. We really appreciate it. First up this week, let me tell you about Cyrus Says. We featured popular YouTuber and actor Prajakta Kohli, who took us through a journey of content creation. We also had conversations with Vasanthi Hariprakash and Sachin Kalbag this week. Really great conversations. Do check those out. Vineet Kanabar goes solo this time on Storytellers and Storysellers as he talks about his favorite IPL ads and how brands have been making content around the cricket league. On The Habit Coach, Ashton was joined by Arjun and Sumesh of the Fighting Goat podcast to talk about fitness for combat sports like the mixed martial arts. On Nankari, Sadaf and Archit discussed the diet and lifestyle of athletes with the host of the Millennial Athlete, Shok Ramchandra, who is also a pro badminton player and coach. Ambarana opens the 4th season of Know Your Kanun with a list of things he has planned on the show for us, including episodes on immigration law and on career prospects for law students. The IPL season's on and we've definitely got you covered. Tune into the Edges and Sledges podcast if you're looking for English, and if you're looking to listen to something in Hindi, definitely check out Khel Neeti. Both are great shows with great takes. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
2020 is a difficult year. A global pandemic, protests, elections, recessions, you get the picture. What we need is a space where we can have nuanced discussions about global affairs and foreign policy. That's where I come in. My name is Hamsini Hariharan and I host the States of Anarchy podcast. Every second Tuesday, I speak to experts in the field of international relations to make a little more sense of the world. So join me on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you're listening to me right now.